My philosophy has always been, if it weren't for employees and it weren't for customers, the restaurant business would be the greatest business in the world. And basically, I hate people. Those were the words from esteemed chef Charlie Trotter, speaking to a camera crew about 15 years ago. Not exactly heroic or inspiring words along the lines of, say, Winston Churchill, but they did shed some light onto this enigmatic, mercurial person that Trotter was. Last week on Seared, I mentioned that I ran into a documentary that looked intriguing. It was about a chef that I admired, the famed American chef Charlie Trotter. And it showed him in a light that seemed surprising to me. So I mentioned that I would watch it and I would report back. So I watched it and I'm reporting back. Now, of course, as I share this, I also want to share some lessons and takeaways that I know will be useful to you, namely in the area of chasing excellence and the pitfalls in doing so. This is going to be a good one, I promise. So strap in, you little unpeeled rambutan, as we dive into the life of a celebrity chef. The documentary is called Love, Charlie, The Rise and Fall of Chef Charlie Trotter. And you can find it, I found it on YouTube. I rented it on YouTube. I don't think it's on Netflix. It's probably on one of those smaller streaming sites. I had a bit of difficulty finding it, but YouTube for $5, and you can rent it, and I think you have 48 hours to watch it. So, but check it out. I do know it's on different streaming sites. Firstly, first impressions is very well done. Very well researched, well presented, crisply edited, really well done. You can tell there was a sizable crew in this, and it was linear, like kind of beginning to end kind of thing, talking head doc for the most part, but it's broken up with tons of personal and professional photos and letters and postcards and other things that show Trotter in just different lights. The film itself it's a complex and nuanced portrait of a man who, it seemed like he was this hopeless, hapless romantic, also of someone who was very idealistic, and also someone who was like absolutely relentless in his desire to be perfect in so many ways, which of course caused problems along the way. And we'll get into that, of course. Trotter mentored dozens upon dozens of young talents. He was lauded as a wonderful friend and a dedicated father, and he has won pretty much all the awards and accolades a chef could get. But at the same time, he was this mysterious, hot-tempered, hot-headed chef who was dismissive of anyone he felt couldn't meet his impossibly high standards, or if he felt he was being disrespected in some way. In many ways, it's a cautionary tale in seeking the Holy Grail. My connection with Trotter was simply through his books. They were spellbinding. The photos were unlike anything I had ever seen before. The concepts, the ideas, the peculiar items, all of it was beyond the norm. And to me, it seemed almost alien-like in how very different his work was. It both presented the way it was presented in the books, but also just where he came up with these ideas. It truly felt like art. Now, by the way, I have spoken about whether chefs are artists or not. I've always said no. Spoiler alert. You can check it out in episode 24 of Seared. But this, to me, wow, it was spectacular. I couldn't help being blown away by the book. So I plunked whatever it was, the $50 or $70, I think, whatever it was for the book. I mean, it was outrageous. I had never paid so much for a cookbook, but I had to have it. And I think I got one or two more of his books, the cookbooks. And there was one wordy word book called Lessons in Service. And that one, he talked about how he ran his restaurant, Charlie Trotter's. That's the name of his restaurant. And it was the first time also that I had heard the concept of firing customers, which now, years later, I've seen that someone like Marco Pierre White would have approved of, because he was known to kick people out of his restaurants all the time. There's actually a video I saw the other day where the interviewer, not accused him, but said, "I heard you kicked 8 people out of your restaurant last week." And Marco Pierre White is pulling on his cigarette. He goes, 8? That's it? I must have had a slow week. So anyway, I learned so much from his books. I never went to Chicago to eat at his place. I've been to Chicago, never went there. I just could only imagine what it would be like. I can imagine also probably being booked out 6 months or a year out. Of course, at the time, I'd heard, this is back in the 90s I'm talking about. I had heard so many amazing reviews and saw the awards he won. And of course, he started to show up on television and online, and he was everywhere. And he was definitely a superstar chef in many ways. I say all this because I saw him as the standard bearer of excellence. That's how I perceived him. Now, if you know me, I am not a starstruck kind of guy at all. I am not. I don't get hyped up on famous folks at all. If someone famous were to walk in front of me, I'd be like, oh, that's cool. But I don't get hung up. But he was certainly someone that I admired. Someone I knew I could never be in terms of his ideas and execution, but I was able to watch from kind of like a few notches down below. And I didn't put him on a pedestal, even though it sounded like I just did. But I just knew he was just in a different realm than I was and most others, because he was in this stratosphere that very few other chefs were in. Watching this documentary was interesting because it sort of pitted my younger 30s self way of seeing him against my more, hopefully, matured 50s self of seeing other people's lives unfold. In other words, I get it now. Back then, I wouldn't have understood as much because I too was going through my own jagged journey. And the TLDR on Charlie, what was interesting is throughout the first part of the documentary, his name was Chuck. And he had like a sparkle in his eye. All the pictures of him growing up, he was like a class clown. He was a joker. He had so much energy. He did so many off the cuff things. People thought he was weird, and he was wacky and wonderful. And he started working in restaurants. He went to France, and he went nonstop to all the top restaurants and made copious notes and drawings and everything. And he came home, and he had just really grown up in terms of his skill and his desire and what he wanted his restaurant to look like. And when he came home and decided, I'm going to start a restaurant, they said Chuck Trotter's, he thought of different names. Chuck Trotter sounds like a steakhouse. So he went back to Charlie, a name he didn't really use. And what's interesting is that is when things started to change. For the better, but also for the worse, which is where the concept of excellence can be a double-edged sword, where yearning for flawlessness can rocket us into those highest stratospheres, but can also become a prison of our own making. I've shared enough about the doc. I don't want to ruin it. It's just someone's story. There's nothing really to ruin per se, but I would certainly check it out. Especially to see how Chef Trotter did change. Like his character arc shifted. His health took the biggest toll, but so did his relationships. He became obsessed with perfection. He was really hard on others, but he was even harder on himself. And he didn't see the joy in life like he used to. He took himself so super seriously, and that did not allow the light of levity or joy to creep in. And that way of being infiltrated all areas of his life. It affected those all around him. And we'll go into a little bit more shortly, but I did want to share that I went from seeing him as like that guardian of greatness to, in a way, a sad, angry, almost empty shell of a man. Not to say that he didn't have his moments of happiness or that he didn't, have his loving, tender moments. I'm not saying that, but that's the energy I felt, like even looking into his eyes. And seeing his demeanor, it felt like it was such a massive shift. He had this him versus the world mentality. He saw himself as having to be on top all the time. And there was something in there of having to prove himself to others, namely his father. But it's like that drive took over and squashed that once vibrant and lively kid. Like, again, that spark just went out of his eyes. It's like the beast he created now had him on a short leash. Now, I want to go on record. I want to say that there's absolutely nothing wrong with having like a steely drive, a flamed passion, a deep desire to be the best at what you do. Those can take you far. It has many people. Those are, some of the traits of successful people. And Charlie was definitely successful, one of the tops of the top. But the tragedy is when that desire envelops you and swallows you whole. Some will say that, well, that's just a risk you take. What are you going to do? And to an extent, yes, there is risk involved, and the reward can increase for sure. But you're also playing with fire. No pun intended. We're going to jump a bit more into this desire for excellence because for many of you, no doubt, you have that fire within to grow and to be known in your industry or just to be at your best in being you. It doesn't have to do anything with work or business or whatnot. Just excelling and being the best version of yourself is a noble thing. It's a wonderful thing. And when you do that, it does go hand in hand at times in excelling in what you do for a living or your crafts or your art or whatever. But as you've deduced, there's a shadow side to this. And this can be the unraveling for so many people. So we're going to dive into that. So have a little quick stretch, will you? And maybe let the dog out, let it do its business, and then we can rock on. So see you in a sec. Welcome back, homie. Thanks for being here. I always appreciate anyone who listens to this. Like, it is an honor to be able to speak into this little microphone and for someone to listen. So thank you. Before I dive in, I just want to remind you that, speaking of listening and tuning in, my new YouTube channel, You Are Gumbo, is up and running and rocking. The stuff I post there is a loving stew of different ingredients. And while right now it's kind of leaning more on the foodie side, I have started talking about different things. And yes, for those of you who know me from maybe TikTok or maybe Instagram, you're going to start seeing the wigs and costumes come out again. So if you know the stuff, if you know, I definitely have a plethora of things in the tickle trunk, so to speak, and I'm just having fun with it. So anyway, check me out there. Link in the description. You Are Gumbo. That was like a radio voice. Welcome to Gay Rock. All right. Let's talk excellence. Excellent. I need more coffee. I'm getting goofy now. All right. So striving for both excellence and perfectionism. Oh, I know this, especially the perfectionism part. I'll share a bit more. They both kind of look the same. They involve a high standard of performance, right? Am I right? But they differ significantly in their approach and their impact. And again, they may look the same on the surface for a while, but underneath there's mucho differences, a lot going on. So if you're going for excellence, right? We all want to lean toward excellence. Who doesn't? With excellence, you'll find a few things. One is that you focus on continuous improvement, right? It's like setting high goals, setting high standards, and you work towards them. And understanding that it's a journey. The whole point of growth is a journey. It's not always the destination. Another thing about excellence is that it embraces challenges, right? Challenges, roadblocks, problems, whatever you want to call them, they're just opportunities. They're opportunities for growth and learning, and that's it, right? You stumble, you get up. Simple. Well, not always simple, but not easy. Another thing about excellence is that people who strive towards excellence tend to have a healthy kind of balance. It's not my favorite word, balance, but you know what I'm saying. There's a balance between effort and enjoyment. And also understanding that you need time to recoup and recharge, and that takes nothing away from your work or your pursuit. It's recognizing that perfection is often unattainable. And the other part about excellence and pursuing excellence is that you build a positive mindset, right? Like excellence fosters a potent but yielding mindset. What I mean is like where you can celebrate achievements and learn from the setbacks at the same time. Like you're not consumed by fear. You're not in a lax state, which is where perfectionism tends to live, right? Like perfectionism is where it gets a bit dicey. Actually, it gets a lot dicey. Because first of all, there's unrealistic expectations. Like if you're a perfectionist or recovering perfectionist or you know a perfectionist, you know that the standards are set impossibly high, right? Which leads to like constant disappointment and frustration. I talked about expectations in the last episode. I think that would be number 35. And it's the same thing. It's like you come in with these expectations that will almost never deliver. And then it sets you into the frustration and anger and resentment and disappointment. So it's similar. Perfectionism, again, like I said, it's fear. So one of the biggest ones, fear of failure. So perfectionists actually will avoid challenges or risks because of that deep-seated fear of failure. And so that's where procrastination sets in. That's where procrastination, it lives there. It's one of perfectionism's most common and favorite disguise, if you will. Not all procrastination is perfectionism, but a lot of times it is. Perfectionism, also there's an impact, a negative impact on well-being. And we're talking anxiety, stress, even depression. And this is where Charlie Trotter got hit hard. His strokes, his alleged substance abuse down the line, his mental health. And I mean mental health in all manners. I don't mean just like emotional, like his physical health affected his brain. He was repeating things a lot. He would get lost. Like it was that. And obviously his emotional states, his outbursts, his failing relationships and marriages. This was all part of the negative impacts on his well-being. One thing perfectionists also do is engage in a lot of all or nothing thinking, right? That black and white thinking, viewing outcomes as either perfect or an absolute complete failure. And I was laughing because the other day I saw a meme. I thought it was perfect, where the first line was, failed to hit your goal, agony. Met or exceeded your goal, okay. And that too, like that is me. Sometimes I get accused of that, where it's like I'll hit my goal, like, or like if I stumble on something, and obviously I'm talking when I'm in my perfectionist states. If I fail something small, I'm just like, oh my God, end of the world. And if I hit something or even exceed it, I'm like, yeah, well, that I should have. Like, why should I even celebrate? Which is wild, right? And that's when I know I'm in that mindset. So when I saw that, I was laughing. Because even so, like what that says to me is like, even when you do feel like you hit perfect, you don't enjoy it. You just don't. Another thing that perfectionists struggle with is obsession and burnout. So you're so hyper-focused on something that you neglect everything else. And I'm not talking about like where people with ADHD, let's say, they can hyper-focus and forget to eat and all that. I'm talking about like an ongoing, chronic, acute kind of obsession and burnout cycle that happens. And that perfectionism can play a huge part, or it could be all of that. Another thing, and this is also what Charlie Trotter suffered from, was the comparison and competition thing. Constantly comparing themselves with others, and it just created this really competitive mindset, and with other restaurateurs and other chefs, and it didn't go well. I mean, he did have a community around him, and there's times where he was like this beautiful friend, and other times it was just like he had the boxing gloves on, and which led to both him feeling inadequate and superior, like vacillating between the two. And that was textbook Trotter in many ways. Isolation. You may isolate yourself to avoid criticism or maintain your high standards, right? Like leading to loneliness or lack of social connections. And again, that was him. And I can say that too at times for myself. I can get into my little bubble in my little man cave down here and just avoid, because I don't want to look at anything. I don't want to know, because I'm just working on my thing in an unhealthy way. The last thing I would share is rigidity. That relentless pursuit of perfection can make you inflexible and resistant to change, hindering your ability to adapt to new situations or learn from mistakes. And, in the documentary, they, you can stay on top for only so long. And tastes change, like literally and figuratively. And as his restaurant no longer was the top restaurant in Chicago, let alone, the world or North America even, people asked him, like, maybe we should change the concept. Maybe people are saying the dining room's too formal, too stodgy and all, and he just didn't want to change anything. It was in that, like, no, this it's an all or nothing thinking, my way or the highway. And yeah, I mean, in essence, striving for excellence is, it can be healthy and productive and can drive your personal and professional growth. Absolutely. But when you hit on the shadow side of that, which is perfectionism, it can be self-defeating. It's self-defeating behavior that can hinder progress and just really hit you in your well-being. As I think back to a lot of the times that I have and still can chase perfection, is that you become a slave to it. Trotter chasing perfection was no different than someone like me chasing the dragon with alcohol. It's never enough. It's never enough. I don't know if you know in math, if you're not familiar with it, the asymptotes, you can look it up. It's like a curved line, like on an axis. It's a line that just gets closer and closer and closer and closer to the axis line, but never touches it. And that to me is like is like what perfectionism feels like. Like you never touch it, or you never touch it because you berate yourself. Like you get so close. You get like so absolutely close. But you will still berate yourself for falling short. Right? And that energy, that need to have it so precise, and along the way hammering yourself because it's not exactly where it should be, it's just destructive. Yes, pushing for perfectionism, it can land you in the excellence zone, but also can tear away at your self-esteem, tarnish your actual accomplishments, and make you feel like you're a loser. Because if I'm aiming for perfect, by nature, anything less is I didn't hit my goal. Whereas if I'm aiming for excellence, anywhere around excellence, even if it's abject failure, it's still on the way to the goal. Do you know what I mean? Like it's because you're going to learn from that failure. Where someone who doesn't hit perfection, there's no learning. That's the trap. And what happened with Trotter is, again, not only was he hard on himself, he extended that to everyone else. Yeah, chefs can be demanding, of course. Anyone who excels will have standards. We all need to have our standards. But when those cross into attaching themselves to stories of self-worth and self-esteem, then it gets, again, the shadow side. Because I'm attaching meaning to something that I need not to. I've mentioned shadow, but it's important to recognize that the shadow side of excellence is not inherent to the trait itself, but rather of how it's pursued. So excellence doesn't necessarily have a shadow side, but how you approach and how you see excellence does. And the key to avoiding that shadow side of pursuing excellence is balancing it with other values like compassion, humility, self-examination, and a healthy work-life balance. It's learning to change the narrative in your mind, the beliefs. Like maybe no one will love me if I make a mistake. That's a big one. No one thinks that, but it's unconscious. And if you watch the documentary, you'll get the sense that that's how Charlie Trotter felt towards his dad. I don't know if it's entirely true. That's what at least I picked up from the documentary. I don't know. I'm not him, but I think that was something that he carried with him. What's also important is in dealing with perfectionism is really it's hard. It's hard, but leaning into imperfection and knowing that it's divine in its own way. Like failures are lessons. No one likes to fail. No one likes to feel like a failure. No one wants to, wake up and realize everything they've done is not happening or they didn't hit the mark like they wanted to. But when you step back, if you can step back and look at it objectively, like what's the gift here? One thing that has helped me over the years as well is meditating, being mindful, and celebrating small wins. I still don't do that enough. I still do not do that enough. And that's something that I share because I'm just being open, because perfectionism has stopped me so many times. It still does. And I've gotten better, much better. But it can hold me back. It can stop me in my tracks because of all the things I just shared, like all the stories that are attached to it. If I don't show up in a certain way, or if my video doesn't look just like absolutely sparkling and stunning, or if my audio is not crisp and clean, if my coaching isn't like spot on, or my video, whatever, like I'll fuss and muss over it for way too long. And then the moment is gone, or it doesn't play out well. And back in my chefing days, I knew I wouldn't be an upper echelon chef. That wasn't my goal, to be honest. Which is why it was easy for me to admire a lot of these top chefs, because I realized like I wanted to be better, absolutely, and I did well. I did do well, except for maybe the drinking part. that held me back. But my videos, podcasts, my written work, I can be ruthless. We all can. We can all be our harshest critics. But when I watched this documentary, I felt what it was like I felt him. I felt what it was like at a deep level. Like I both admired him, like on a twisted level, if you know what I mean? Because I was like, why didn't I do more of that? Even though I knew it was destroying his life. I never had that deep drive for anything in my life. I have passions. There's things that I'm passionate about and all that, but I never had that one overarching thing. And so it was fascinating to watch that. And when I watch anyone who pursues excellence, that's why we love watching those kinds of documentaries and movies, because it's inspiring. But at the same time, when I watched that doc, I also felt bad for him, because I know what an addiction is like, and he was addicted to perfect. He was addicted to perfect. Now, I didn't mention it, but Trotter died in 2013, a year after he shut down his restaurant, which was open for 25 years. The official cause of his death was stroke. But for many, and they do mention this in the documentary, it was his perfectionism that ultimately took him. He was only 54. Alrighty, gentle listeners, thank you again for allowing me into your ear holes. Sounds weird. I really should re-record that. Anyway, the documentary is called Love, Charlie, The Rise and Fall of Chef Charlie Trotter. Check it out. And speaking of checking out, please check out You Are Gumbo. I'd love if you can do that. And for this Seared, please review, comment, like, subscribe, share, all the good stuff. All of it. Let's pump this out to more people, shall we? I'm not trying to make this perfect, but let's strive for excellence in sharing the word. It really does help me out. And I would love to hear, honestly, I'd love to hear if this is helping in any way. I do this because I do want to share stories, and I want to share insights and thoughts. And my goal is to help. My goal is to help anyone out. And if this is helping in any way, please let me know. I don't need all the details, but if this is some way serving you, let me know, or share it. Forward it to someone that maybe you think of when you think of these topics, or as I'm sharing these. It would, that's what I do. I don't make money off of this. I don't get, I don't get a lot of downloads. I don't get a lot, and it's not a poor me. It's just, I share that because I love doing this. And, even if it's helping one or two of you, that's cool. But as a communicator and broadcaster and coach and all the other things that I am, deep down, I'm really here to help. And if this is just one channel of one way of doing it, that's great. So anyway, I will leave it at that. My little gulab jamins. All right. Kitchen's closed. Now scram.